This is the third and final part of our Monster Pod, just because we've been through a lot of big contenders. We still have more to come, as well as some really interesting long shots. If you like what you see here, support our channel by signing up for In the Money Plus today. More podcasts, digests of the picks from all the regular shows, special grid picks for all the big races on Oaks and Derby Day, as well as a bunch of extra analysis in the Money Podcast.com/plus for that. We also want to thank our friends at the Preakness Future Wave. Bet that now, Express Bet or First Bet. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in the videos to come. PTF here thanking you so much for all your support. On with the show. Next up on the show, very happy to welcome back a very popular guest on these airwaves from the fantastic NBC coverage of thoroughbred racing and the Beyer Speed Figure team. He is Randy Moss. Randy, what's going on?
Hello, Pete. A lot going on right now, isn't there?
You getting excited for your trip to Louisville?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these weird things, right? I mean, this is my 43rd Kentucky Derby. So on one hand, you say, well, it's a whole lot of work. It's not much, spare time for pleasure or anything. So it's not really a bucket list item anymore. But then on the other hand, if there was, the first year I'm not at the Derby, I'm probably going to be, oh, gee, I wish I was there. So I'm not complaining.
It makes sense. And you've pointed out in the other video we did with Jerry Bailey that we suggest folks check out. We're not going to get into this here, but just the depth of this undercard on the 2 days and the amount of equine star power, really looking almost like a mini Breeders' Cup over the 2 days. But we are here to talk about the big one, the Run for the Roses. And I threw the question out to you, is there a horse that you wanted to talk about? And I thought it was very interesting, the one we ended up settling on. What is it about Derma Sotogake that you find intriguing?
I think there are a lot of reasons, Pete. There are a lot of things about the horse. First of all, he is a tremendously talented horse, and he showed that in the UAE Derby. I think the UAE Derby was the fastest by numbers of all of the prep races, including Forte, Tapit Trice, Angel of Empire, Practical Move, you name it. I think it was the most visually impressive of all the prep races to boot. We've seen Japanese dominance worldwide in international racing in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai, in Hong Kong, in their annual international weekend. Japanese horses have won the Melbourne Cup and the Cox Plate in Australia. They've won everywhere. And right now, the Japanese horses are really clicking on all cylinders. And everything leads me to believe that Derma Sotogake has a legitimately strong chance to win the Derby. And what a story that would be.
Let's talk about the figure that you mentioned. We got into this a little bit on the other show that we did with Jerry, but how did you arrive at your estimate, and what would you estimate that figure from the UAE Derby to be?
Well, we don't make official Beyer Speed figures for Maidan, and we most certainly don't make them for Saudi Arabia. But when you look at the Saudi Cup this year, Country Grammar shipped from the United States and ran very well in defeat. Country Grammar had been running very consistent Beyer Speed figures in Southern California in the 99 to 100 range. So it would be very easy to project that that's about the race that he took with him to Saudi Arabia. If you do that, there were several Japanese horses that finished around him in Saudi Arabia who came back in the Dubai World Cup and ran their race seemingly again, as opposed to Country Grammar, who went off form because of a slow start and other reasons, right? So therefore, I think we can kind of guesstimate the Dubai World Cup number to be somewhere around a 102, which is very low by Dubai World Cup standards. The UAE Derby on raw speed figures, and it's very easy to do this because a mile and 3/16, mile and a quarter, very comparable distances, very easy to do this, was 5 points faster than the Dubai World Cup, which is a real rarity. It hadn't happened in 15 years. And so therefore, I think we can estimate that the Derma Sotogake figure is somewhere in the 106 to 107 range. Now, with a good trip, he was on the rail both turns, so maybe you downgrade a little bit because of that, but who knows, he may have the same kind of trip in Louisville.
That's the next question I was going to ask. What kind of trip do you want from Derma Sotogake here? Do you have any analysis of the sectionals to suggest if he's fast enough in terms of raw time to make the front?
No, I have no analysis of the sectionals now that Trackus is no longer in existence. I couldn't find sectionals for the Dubai World Cup anywhere. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but I sure couldn't find them. But there is a lack of established one-dimensional type of speed horses in this year's Kentucky Derby. So that would lead me to believe that even if he's not on the lead, Derma Sotogake should be very forwardly placed. When you look at all of his races in Japan, and I have, they were all from slightly off the pace. The UAE Derby is the only race in his career so far that he's gone to the lead. And he showed quite a bit of determination in Japan coming from off the pace in some of those races, bowling his way through between horses late in the race to go on and win. So he's not a one-trick pony. He doesn't have to have the lead. I think, given the way he ran in the UAE Derby and given the way Christophe Lemaire rode Crown Pride in last year's Kentucky Derby, right, which was totally over the top, going for the early lead like he was riding in the All-American Futurity, I pointed out. I think you can expect that Derma Sotogake will be allowed to show his speed. And I think that's a good thing looking at this year's field.
What do you think about price internationally? We were seeing 20-1 a few weeks ago. That's long gone. It's come into about 12-1. This feels like a horse that, the draw and the buzz between now and the big day, I feel like could go in either direction off that. Maybe almost being a second choice if it's positive steam, or maybe drifting out more to 18-20 if the vibes are going the other way. What would your best guess be at what price we're going to be looking at Derma Sotogake, and at what price with a decent draw would he be a bet?
I just sent my estimated line right now, pre-post position line, to NBC Sports. They asked me for it. And I have Forte at 7-2, Tapatrice at 5-1, Angel of Empire at 6-1, and Practical Move and Derma Sotogake both at 7-1. So that's my best estimate at what he'll be. And look, if you have a horse that's the best horse in the race on paper, off of their last start, speed figure wise, estimated speed figure wise, visually, to me, there's nothing wrong with 7-1 in that spot.
Two pieces of business before I let you get out of here. One, I just got a text from Jerry Bailey, which is kind of fun in and of itself. And he wanted to give the corrected info about where you can find on NBC. So Saturday, 12 to 7:30 on NBC, Peacock, and NBC Sports. Friday for the Oaks, USA Network, along with Peacock. Friday coverage from 1 to 6 p.m. You're definitely going to watch or DVR that coverage to make sure you check out all the work that they do. And then last but not least, this Preakness Future Wager that's sponsoring our Derby Monster Pod. What would you like to do with your $100? You can split stakes. You can pick one horse. You tell me what you're thinking here, Randy, and I'll make it happen.
Well, since it's the Preakness and not the Derby, and since if Todd Pletcher doesn't win the Derby, he's pretty much loath to come back with horses in 2 weeks, I'm going to eliminate Pletcher's horses. I think Brad Cox is probably in the same boat for the Preakness with his Derby horses. If he doesn't win, I don't think you're going to see him move on 2 weeks later. He does have first mission from the Lexington that he has pretty much confirmed as being pointed for the Preakness. I think Tim Yakteen would come back in 2 weeks with Practical Move. I didn't pick him for the Derby. I'm not going to pick him for the Derby, but I think the slightly shorter distance at the Preakness probably works to his advantage. He's got a lot of tactical speed. He's 10-1 right now in the early line for the Preakness wager, so I will take Practical Move. And by the way, thank you for those times on NBC. I kind of need to know those.
We're here to help. We're here to help, Randy. It's a two-way street around here. And there, I had a little host fail. I forgot to put our graphic up. I got so excited about chatting with you, but folks can see the sort of the tail of the tape there on Derma Sotogake. Very interesting contender. I want to say long shot, but he might not be a long shot by the time the day comes, but certainly one of the most interesting storylines. Check it out on NBC. Randy, we'll check in with you next week. I don't know if we'll have you back on air, but we'll at least come and say hi or chat on Twitter. Really always a pleasure getting your thoughts and eager to see what you think of the situation after the draw.
Always enjoy doing this with you, Pete. Take care.
Brad, I got to imagine that when you decided you were going to be a horse trainer, you didn't think one day you'd have four getting in the gate for the Kentucky Derby.
No, it was a dream. So I don't know. It's, it's a good run. Very happy with what our team's been able to accomplish. And I think we're set up for a big weekend next week.
Well, we'll start with the one who's likely to be the shortest price. I guess maybe Verifying could get interesting as a buzz horse, but we'll start with Angel of Empire, the winner of the Arkansas Derby. How's he training? What are your thoughts with him going into the race?
Very happy with how he's training and just how he's moving. He's, he was at Churchill last fall. And, so he has experience there. His work since the Arkansas Derby have been very good. I really liked his move last week, and I thought it was very good on the outside of Jace's road. We got one last work tomorrow. Hopefully it all goes well and he bounces out of it in good order. And we'll, hopefully he's got a great mind. That's the one thing about this horse I think is probably the biggest thing. He's a horse that I do think can handle the crowd, the noise, just all that goes into this Kentucky Derby with horses having to overcome, once again, the noise and just all they're up against. But, very intelligent horse.
And I'm sure with all of them, there's probably you have a question or a thought or a concern or a worry. What's the thing about Angel of Empire? Is it do you worry where he draws? Do you worry about the distance? What are your questions with him?
Yeah, I always hate to use the word worry, but I guess my concern with him, and it's all of them, is getting a trip, right? And just hoping. It's just such a tough race to overcome a bad trip. And it's only a race in America where you have to run against 19 other horses. And somebody's going to get a bad trip. Somebody's going to get squeezed at the gate. At the start, somebody's going to get sawed off going into the first turn. You just hope you're not one of them. We saw how roughly run the wood was. And I think it was there. So, that's always the concern with the Kentucky Derby is just getting a good, clean trip. And I think that's one reason why being up close can be so important and so valuable. Obviously, it depends on the pace, but it's just one of those things where it's just so many things can happen, and it's always come back to this racing luck thing. You need more racing luck in the Kentucky Derby than any other race you're involved in the world, really.
Well, you mentioned a horse that'll be close up. I would think that Verifying will be close up. I love the way he ran last time in the Bluegrass. I thought that was probably the fastest North American prep race that we've seen in terms of speed figures. What are your thoughts on Verifying?
Love him. He's doing great. Once again, he has to breeze one more work out of the Bluegrass. I thought it was really good. Galloped out well. Gaffleon breezed him. Obviously rode him in the Bluegrass. He was very pleased with how he breezed and how he was moving. So, very high on the horse. We have been for a long time. He's a very talented colt. This is the second start of his career. We tried him in a grade 1 where he showed up and ran a good race. So I do think, we don't know the post. We don't know the pace, or we don't know how it's going to play out or anything. But I do think he can be, he should be setting a good trip. And if he does, I think he's a horse that's improving at the right time.
And then, the draw probably got you last time in New York with Hit Show, drawn out to the 13 and being wide out around there. What are your thoughts on him? I thought he ran extremely well too, considering the circumstances.
He did. I think he's a good colt. I think he's had 2 good races going 1 mile and an eighth. There's plenty of time between those 2 races. He didn't regress. His number moved forward last time. If he can move forward again, I think a lot like Verifying, if he can take that move forward, I think he's a real player. I really do believe that. And I think, he's out of a tap at mare that I think I think that's enough stamina there to where he's definitely going to be able to handle this 1.25 miles.
And if those 3 weren't enough, what the heck, let's throw a 4th one in there. How about Jace's Road?
Good colt. Been a little bit in and out, a little bit inconsistent with his runs. I think you can pretty much look at his form and figure out that he may not like an off track, and he probably needs to be forwardly placed to be at his best. We'll ask him to run out of there and get an early position because I think it gives him his best opportunity to win. He was very impressive in the gun runner on the lead back in December at the fairgrounds. And, once again, I think he's a horse that needs to be forwardly placed for sure.
Well, the Derby is upon us, but this Monster podcast is sponsored by the Preakness Future Wager, and a lot of people giving a lot of interest to First Mission. How's he doing with that race 3 weeks away?
Came out of the Lexington in great shape. He's going to have his first, shipped him back to Churchill. He'll prepare for the Preakness at Churchill. He's a horse that, we threw a lot at him in a short period of time there. Not exactly sure on the dates, but I think he obviously ran mid-February. I think we wheeled him back in 4 weeks, performed very well, and then we brought him back again in 4 weeks to win the Lexington, or right around 4 weeks to win the Lexington. So he's going to get I think maybe 5 weeks between the Lexington and the Preakness, and I think that'll give us an opportunity to work him 3 times. And he's been solid enough in the mornings and give us a lot of confidence to obviously jump from a maiden straight into a grade 3, and he performed the way he trained. And if we continue to see more of that and an improvement, I think he's a real player in the Preakness. He's a very intelligent horse, a big pedigree, a lot of stamina there, and I think I really do believe he's the type. I'm glad we nominated him to the Triple Crown because he was one of the last horses. I had this conversation with Michael Banahan. It's like, I think lots of times when you start nominating these horses to the Triple Crown, you start thinking, well, can they make the Derby? Can they make the Derby? We kind of knew he couldn't make the Derby based off his late start, but we did think the Preakness was a possibility, and certainly glad we put up the $600 early on, because I'm hopeful it'll pay off for sure.
Well, Brad, we wish you the best of luck in the Derby, and we know you're officially a winner of the Derby, but let's get one of these across the wire first so you can hold the roses and hold up the trophy in the infield and all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure, Jonathan. I look forward to that, and thanks for having me on.
All right, we'll see you next week. Take care.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
I mean, I'm hanging out in a basement in Saratoga, and you're hanging out at Keeneland. I'm a little bit jealous.
It's beautiful too. I can't complain. The birds are really loud. There's a lot going on here at Keeneland, but beautiful backdrop, beautiful day.
Well, you're an hour down the road from where something very important happens on the first Saturday in May, and it feels like Todd Pletcher has a loaded hand. We're not going to talk about some of the top 2 that he has on the market with Forte and Tappet Trice, but I wanted to talk with you a little bit about Kingsbarns. What do you think about his chances in the run for the Roses?
I really like him, honestly. From the time that he won the Louisiana Derby, I pegged him as one of the likeliest horses I would probably pick in the Kentucky Derby. I just really like horses that have had that last stop in the Louisiana Derby. I think it's more so 2 things. I think in Louisiana, and I talked to Brad Cox about this, he just thinks that Louisiana, first and foremost, is a very good track to prepare a Derby horse or Oaks horse, whatever it may be. Now, Kingsbarns wasn't training there over the winter. He was training in Florida for Todd, but I do think the distance, the surface, everything about the Louisiana Derby really is an important prep race for horses to run well in the Kentucky Derby. I'm not necessarily saying win, but run well. And historically, that has been true, at least over the course of the past couple of years. To me, he just kind of seems like he has a high cruising speed. I don't think he needs the lead, but he's fast. He has to be forwardly placed. There's no doubt about it. He breaks well, hopefully goes to the front end. I just like his action. I like how he won the Louisiana Derby. I was against him before the Louisiana Derby because I was like, what did he really beat at Tampa last time out? He dominated. It was visually a very strong race, but it was a somewhat weak field. And again, he crushed it in the Louisiana Derby. Now, I will say, I will preface that by saying that I, and other people might have a different opinion, I thought there was a forward trend to the track that day. It seemingly was hard to make up more than 3 lengths. If you look at the 2 turn races on Louisiana Derby day. So, that could have helped him a little bit. But for him to be so light on seasoning and win the Louisiana Derby the way he did, I think this horse has an incredible amount of talent.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned, and I really agree with, is that a lot of these horses that are going to be running in the Derby, there's a big question mark for them about distance, right? Most of them have been running at 1 1/8. Kingsbarns has passed that test, going 1 3/16. Like you mentioned, the distance of the Louisiana Derby. That means a lot to me. Does it mean a lot to you as well?
Oh, yeah. It definitely does. And I don't think there should be any distance limitations for him, considering his pedigree, but also considering how he's running. I don't want to call him like a one-dimensional horse, but I do think for his best shot to win the Derby, he has to be forwardly placed. He doesn't need to be on the lead. He just has that type of action that he needs to get his legs underneath of him and kind of find a rhythm in the front end of the field. So I'm hoping he gets that kind of trip, but you never really know at the end of the day. And it's kind of the complete opposite for Forte, and especially Tapit Trice, who does not get out of the gate.
Yeah, so, he's got some positives, right? He's run at the mile in 3/16. He's trained by Todd Pletcher. He's got a pedigree with Uncle Mo. He's got a lot of things going in his favor. But, I think it's also important to note that you said that you felt like the track was a little bit forward that day. The pace wasn't very fast that he found the front end in. What's kind of your final answer on Kingsbarns? Is he a win type, an underneath type, or a toss type for you?
Not a toss type. For sure. I just have a feeling about this horse. I've liked him from the get-go, and I always get roped into these Todd Pletcher horses, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to say he's a strong candidate for win, and if not that, definitely underneath.
It's okay to be a Todd Pletcher fan. You live with the president of the Todd Pletcher fan club.
He is waving the Todd Pletcher flag for sure.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. We do, before we let you get out of here, we want to give you a free $100 Preakness future wager, a new wager from First Racing. Who would you want to bet your $100 on to win the Preakness?
To win the Preakness. I'm going to go, oh God, verifying.
Wow, verifying. Okay, what number is verifying in this thing? 27. All right. Gabby's going to go with verifying. Gabby, we appreciate it. Have a fun day at Keeneland today, and we'll see you maybe around Churchill somewhere.
Sounds good, JK.
Thank you. Marshall, what's going on?
Not much. Happy to be talking Derby. Excited. I'm going to the Derby this year. It'll be the second Derby I've been to, but the first Derby that's non-pandemic. I went to 2021. Which had a 50,000 person cap, and excited to go for the first time. In fact, I'm going to go to every Triple Crown race this year.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. My streak got broken during COVID, so I haven't been since. I was on like an 11 or 12 Derby streak, and so I was going to go this year. I got the wedding, and so I'll be back next year.
Well, you'll be missed. The weather looks great so far. Knock on wood.
Fingers crossed. There's a lot of disappointed people in Memphis, though, are going to miss your Derby party.
Yeah, I need to bring it back. Hasn't been back since. I haven't done it since 2019. Did it for 2007 to 2019. It actually came off a bad beat. I had a bad beat one year, lost a bunch of money. And last year I lost a bunch of money. So if I weren't going to the Derby, I needed a distraction, because there's one lesson learned is everyone talks about Rich Strike being a once in 100-year outcome, but we had Mind That Bird. We had Giacomo. I lost so much money. I threw a Derby party, and basically from Mind That Bird, I didn't even bet the Derby that year. So the Derby party was a great distraction. Now with Rich Strike, I lost so much last year, it put me in the tank for the whole year. So I'm going this year. I'm going to be more disciplined. It's just one race. I keep reminding myself it is just one race. Don't let it set back your whole year.
There you go. Well, I got to say, I don't know there's too many people that I think watch more races at Oaklawn. And so when there's a horse like Confidence Game who won one of the preps at Oaklawn, I had to get you on here to talk what you thought about Confidence Game.
Well, I think he's a fun horse. I think he was really interesting going into the Rebel. I sort of liked him at that long price. I put a lot of my money through Giant Mischief that day, but I thought he ran a very credible race. It was a very fast pace that day. He was pretty far off it and got a pretty nice trip, but overall, he ran the best race of any horse that day. There were some decent horses behind him that verified, ultimately verified that it was a fairly strong race. It was, I think, ultimately better than the Arkansas Derby. You had Red Route 1 who came back and won over the weekend in an older stakes race. You had Verifying, which ran big. So Confidence Game ran really well. Now, my big concern about him is the 10 weeks off. Now, I know that this is a modern Derby era, and sort of notions we have of horses running within 42 days or within 28 days, a certain number of days in the Derby shouldn't matter as much going forward, that we will have a layoff horse come and win the Derby. I just don't know that this is the type of horse to do that. He's on a 70-day layoff. I'm not quite sure if that was intentional or not. He did seemingly miss his first work back. So normally horses work back 2 weeks from a race. It took him 3 weeks to get back and make a work. They initially said we're going to train to the Derby, and then Keith Disarm was the trainer, talked about running in the Lexington, which I thought was a weird move, given they'd already qualified for the Derby and talked about just training up to the Derby. He worked on April 14th, worked a mile in 1:38.1 and galloped out in 2:05.4. Disarm was a little bit disappointed that the work wasn't faster, but did like the internal fractions of the work. Did not work on the 21st, and I don't know. I don't think he worked today. I think the track was wet, so hasn't worked out of that. I don't know if they treated that like a race, but there's enough noise here that I don't think this is the kind of horse I want to bet off a 70-day layoff. The other part of it is I think highly of Disarm as a trainer, but I think of him more as a trainer who's better in a campaign, right? His horses get better during a campaign. And this horse, again, has had a very nice campaign leading into the Rebel, leading into his nice win in the Rebel. All those races he's run in really since his maiden breaker were all fast paces. He ran, really well in his allowance that he won, beating Rocket Can. His LeCompte had an excuse because he's up on a fast pace. And then, again, this race is run just off the fast pace. But, again, we're talking 70 days. And Disarmo, he's, 8% off a 60-day plus layoff on the dirt. He's 6% with firsters. He's not the kind of trainer that I see winning, the biggest race in the country off a 10-week layoff.
Yeah, the layoff is a concern, especially pointing out some of those kind of starts and stops. It seems like, the Lexington plan is very bizarre. The mile work, as if they were thinking fitness was an issue. There's just a lot of questions there. Marshall, being a champion horse player yourself, I got to ask you, I can't just have you talk about confidence game. What are your thoughts for the race? Who are you kind of excited about kind of building some stuff around?
Yeah, I will say that, they've already said they're going to run in every Triple Crown race, which I thought was interesting for a confidence game. And he is, I think he'll be maybe more of a player in the Preakness. I don't know if he's in the Preakness Futures wager. I think you have to think of these Preakness Future wagers like conditional wagers, as a lot of those horses won't go, right? And so you can almost imagine them as even money to 2-1 in the dirt in the Preakness, conditional on if they win the Derby. So he's one that will go and might offer a little bit of value. For the Derby itself, for now, I like the Japanese horse, Derma Sotogake. I'm not going to complicate things. He's the fastest horse on figures. I know there are a lot of questions about those UAE numbers, and I've heard some figures that people have done, 105 maybe. Either way, it was a faster UAE Derby than the World Cup. It's the first time that's been true since Meydan went to dirt. And he's the fastest horse in the race. And if he's 7-2 or better, I'm going to bet him. I don't want to try to overcomplicate things. I've overthought this race in the past. Here, he's the fastest horse. He's going to be a price. He's going to, he might be 6 or 8-1, and people say that's too short. But for me, fastest horse in the race. He's a couple lengths faster than everybody else. He has tactical speed. I'm going to bet him at higher than 7-2. Maybe try to string some horses underneath. Some of the Angel of Empire verifying. I'm going to be fairly tight, though, when I bet this race, because I do think there are a lot of horses like Confidence Game that I feel aren't usable.
And as far as you mentioned the Preakness future wager, all of our guests are getting $100 free wager on that Preakness future. Who do you want to use your 100 on?
I'm going to use that on First Mission. I'm the Lexington winner for Brad Cox. I'm confident he's going to run there. Like I said, if we're thinking about this in terms of value, think about like a horse like Forte. If Forte's 7-2 on Derby Day, and if he wins the Derby, then he's maybe even money on Preakness Day. So you're going to need at least 10-1 in the Preakness future wager to make it worth it, right? Because you basically have to have those two things go. Having listened to your excellent interview with Mike Rapoli, it sounds pretty clear that if Forte doesn't win the Derby, he won't go to the Preakness. And heck, it even sounds, reading between the lines, that they could skip the Preakness, right? I don't know that they would do it, but he's not a huge fan of the distancing of our Triple Crown events. So given that's the case, for a horse like Forte, you need 10-1, given those conditional probabilities. So with First Mission, we know he's going. right? And he's going to be one of the faster horses going into the race and just getting better. I think, ultimately he may be one of Brad's best horses, just not quite ready for the Derby. So that's going to be my bet for the Preakness future.
Marshall, we appreciate your time. Best of luck next week. I'll see you. I'm going to be there early in the week. You probably won't. I'll probably miss you, but have a great time and make some money.
All right, let's do it.
Next up on the show, we bring in the voice of Churchill Downs. He is Travis Stone. What's going on, Travis?
What's up? How are you?
People probably know that in addition to your work as a race caller, you're also a pretty esteemed horse player as well, though not at the same time. Very curious to get your thoughts on this year's Kentucky Derby, and we'll start out with the horse you've been assigned for this show, and that's Disarm, a horse that I think I was one of the many who first thought Kentucky Derby for this runner after the very first race. The plan hasn't gone exactly the way one would have hoped, I think you could say, from that day forward. But I always have a little bit of extra sympathy for a horse who we've identified as a potential Derby player from so far out. Where do you stand with Disarm? How does he fit in this year's Kentucky Derby?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things going for him. One was he showed some ability early on, and was probably in everybody's conversation in the early stages of the trail. And obviously some stuff went wrong or whatever they had to deal with. His return race in the Louisiana Derby was solid, right? I mean, there wasn't much pace in there. Kingsbarns was able to get away with a loose early lead and took him all the way around. Disarm came with a bit of a run. And as many of these horsemen found out this spring, the points that were distributed on the Derby trail were altered a bit to sort of encourage additional participation in these races. More points were rewarded, and thus Disarm, despite finishing second, was on the outside looking in, and they had to wheel back in the Lexington, right? And I think people will look at that effort as being subpar, suboptimal, but that's a Keeneland Mount of 16th race in a race that was fairly dominated on the front end. Disarm did not have to win; he just had to pick up some points. And to me, in an era where these trainers have convinced us these horses need 6 to 7, 8 weeks between races, I love the fact that this horse is coming in with a race fairly recently, 3 weeks ago. So to me, I think he's extremely live. He's been up against it pace-wise 2 races in a row. And the type of horse that, maybe 20, 30 to 1 could easily hit the number and blow up some exotics. And, never know if the pace gets lightning quick. Maybe
I like
it all. Yeah,
I like the case. Let me ask you this: do you think there's a chance that this was the Disarm run in the Lexington was sort of like a 3D chess kind of move? We want to hit the board. We don't necessarily want to ask for everything and get to the bottom of this horse, because I feel like if you take that form literally, it still leaves him a bunch to find. But if you back into your mind that maybe there's another 10, 15% to go here for the real target for Saturday in May, I can really start to see that case.
Yeah, I mean, if he has to improve. I mean, I don't think we can, we're being silly about that. He has to get a little bit faster. There's faster horses on paper in the race. But whatever, it's early in the season for these horses. They can improve leaps and bounds. Nothing like the Derby with 19 others and all these various scenarios that could shake out. I mean, we all know what happened last year. Those sorts of things happen in these outlier races. So to me, I do think there's an element of that. And then the other thing is, I mean, if you think about it, find a better trainer in America that knows how to nurture and bring dirt horses along than Steve Asmussen. Yeah. And look what he did with Epicenter last year. I mean, obviously it didn't go well in the Breeders' Cup for him, but that was a horse that his campaign was nonstop. And he maintained peak form once they found it. I just don't think there's a trainer better out there than doing so. And so to me, Steve would be playing some 3D chess with that Lexington.
Love it. Yeah. Let's talk about your short list for the race in general. What are you thinking is going to happen on the first Saturday in May? You don't have to give a pick, but like maybe a little short list of horses.
Yeah, I can do that. I mean, you and I were talking before you hit the button. To me, there's some wildness going on in the market right now. I think Angel of Empire is going to take a ton of unexpected support. I think a lot of the sharp horse player public is trying to fade Forte, which sort of makes me want to jump on the Forte bandwagon a little bit because he actually might hit this price that makes sense. I think he's very good. I think he is the horse to beat in many ways. Obviously, I'm not saying anything revolutionary there, but I think and he's getting a little bit too discounted from what we would call the sharps. Because why? He didn't win the Florida Derby by 5 lengths. I mean, what's the deal, right? And he was a horse that had points to get in, so he didn't have to win by 5. And I like how he did respond when Mage blew by him on the turn. And I talked to Irad for the draw, and he said once he went by, Forte got right back into the bit, and he was able to be patient with him, and the horse responded. So I still think he's the horse to beat. And I do like Tapatrice a ton. I thought his Bluegrass was a hugely improved effort. He showed more tactical speed. He was responding to Luis Saez, wanted to get him in the clear and outside early. I don't like Tapatrice if he draws down toward the rail. I think that would prove to be a bit of a tough scenario for him. But I think he might end up when we get to the end of the Triple Crown being the best horse of the group. I think he's got a ton of talent. I think my one Disarm would have been a clever underneath idea. We already talked about him. My other clever idea would be why is everybody just assuming that Verifying is not in the top tier of this group? He's obviously had some talent because his record isn't perfection, or he's got a couple of clunkers here or there. I think people are too dismissive of him. Yeah, he's had a good trip in the Bluegrass, but he might see a good trip here because it doesn't look like there's 45-2 type pace, and it's just a numbers play. Like, he lost to Tapatrice by a head, and he's going to be 3 or 4 times the price. And it just seems sort of silly to say, like, in the long run, I feel like playing horses like Verifying, you end up on the right side of the equation.
No, I get it. Before I let you get out of here, let's talk Preakness future bet. Where would you like your 100 to go?
I would do it on First Mission. I think one of the interesting dynamics of this wager is we don't know how the Derby is going to shake out. So it would be fun to sort of play a little numbers game, see what the horses look like coming into there. We know First Mission is going to the Preakness, and he's talented and he's fast. And as of right now, he's in 9s or so. He's 7-2 when they load in the gate for the Preakness. Talk about an insane overlay. So that's who I would.
Yeah. No, that's a great. I love that approach. I think it makes a ton of sense. May end up following you in on that one, Travis. Well, we'll see you down there. Thanks for taking time out of a busy week. Have a great time at the draw, and we'll see you on the microphone.
Sounds good. Enjoy.
Next up on the show, very happy to bring in a really important member of the In the Money media team, sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes in front of the scenes with some of the great write-ups he's been doing for us. He's a student at the University of Arizona. He's Eric DeCoster. Eric, what's going on?
Nothing much, just getting ready for finals to wrap up, and enjoyed a good weekend at Santa Anita, if you can't tell a little by my voice right now, but we're fired up and we're ready for the Derby.
I love it. It's great to hear. Is there a special buzz around the U of A program this week? Can you tell the difference when big events are happening?
Yeah, me and my classmates were, for the last few weeks, of course, but after the draw and everything, we're going to be geared up and handicapping away the entire card, Oak State, Derby Day, Thurby, all the good stuff.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll talk to you about doing some getting you involved and doing some writing a little bit later in the week as well. You're here today to talk about Jace's Road. Simplest question is this horse a contender in your mind? What role is he going to play in this year's Kentucky Derby?
He's a big player from a pace perspective. I think that's entirely what he is here to do. I don't think he's necessarily a rabbit for his stablemate Angel of Empire, but I think it could evolve to that point in some regards. But there is also a scenario where there's so little pace in this race, and he's one of only a few confirmed speeds, and he can make a little bit more sense in some people's eyes. So he's going to be one of the longer shots, if not the longest shots, but I think there are some intriguing qualities to him.
Do you think he'll end up on any of your tickets?
I could see realistically him being a horse I use way deep in the exotics, purely because if he draws the favorable post, some of the other speeds don't. There's a good chance he could be the fastest of the fast, and that's been the talk all lead up to this Derby. Is there's not a lot of pace, so if he can gut out, we saw him gut out a mile and 3/16 all right in his most recent start, the Louisiana Derby. He didn't get to the front there, but if he can be in front and engaged like we saw in the Gunrunner Stakes a few starts ago to end his 2-year-old year, we know he can be as good as some other horses in this crop. So I think it'd be easy to look over him, but if the race draws it favorably, there's a chance.
It's very interesting. And we have seen horses in international racing anyway, in more of that pace setter role, forget to stop, as it were. If the track's favoring speed, if the pace scenario comes up right, it's one of these, I can see it if I squint after you describe it. What's your thought on the race as a whole, Eric? I'm not going to ask you to give a pick here, but in terms of a short list of horses your eye is drawn to at this point?
Yeah, I think in terms of who's the biggest players on top, it has to be the horses that are continually winning. I think that this race feels so wide open, but when you narrow it down, there's just a few horses in this crop that truly like to win. And that's your Fortes, your Practical Moves, your Tapage Rices, even Angel of Empire. I feel like this year has kind of figured that out. So I'm going to be looking more towards a horse that has been consistently beating the same horses. Because if you try to get creative, you realize this horse has lost to 4 or 5 other runners in this field. It's hard to make a super case for them.
Right. If the form holds up, and as we suspect it might, it's going to probably be one of these logical runners. I mean, we've heard that from a lot of people in terms of the top spot, and then maybe underneath in exotics is where you can get a little interested. Just a random question: where do you stand on the Japanese runner Derma Sotogake? Do you see him as a serious contender?
I do. I think that people are going to read a lot into the UAE Derby, which is fair, but I think he is the best horse they brought over yet. I don't think that's saying much. And when you watch his replays from Japan and the 2 in the Middle East this year, he's just a runner. He knows how to get the job done, and he can do it from anywhere. And that's probably his greatest attribute, is that he can be on the lead, he can press, he can come from mid-pack, he can come from way deep. It doesn't matter. He's going to try to get the job done. That's going to be huge come first Saturday in May.
Let's talk about the Preakness future bet quickly. As a guest on the show, we're going to make a bet for you. Which way are you leaning as far as that race goes?
Yeah, you mentioned Japan in one aspect with Derma Sotogake. How about Mandarin Hero? I know that he'll be there pretty much no matter what. They might AE the Derby, and should they get in, I'm sure the Preakness could still be on the table. I loved how he finished up in the Santa Anita Derby. I think a little extra ground will benefit him. He can clearly hang with some decent horses. People are going to like Practical Move and Skinner. Why not the horse that was right between them? And if he doesn't run in the Derby, a little bit more fresh than some of those rivals.
Great stuff, Eric. Really appreciate you and appreciate all the work you do behind the scenes for us here at In the Money Media. Folks should keep this name in mind because he's going to be doing some great things in this industry. Eric DeCoster, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next up on the show, very happy to welcome somebody who's been on these airwaves before, but not with me. And I've been very excited to welcome to the show from the Naira production team and occasionally talking horses, Sara Elbadwi. Sara, how are things going?
Things are great. I appreciate you having me on.
Excited to talk to you about this year's Kentucky Derby. Let's start with the horse that we assigned you for this little monster pod situation. That's Rocket Can. What do you think of this horse? Are we looking at a potential contender or pretender when it comes to this year's Kentucky Derby?
I think he really started asserting himself as being one of those potential contenders going into that Holy Bull effort. That was a very dominant performance. But then I think we kind of saw him maybe fade into that pretender sort of category when if you wanted to take a shot against Forte coming back from his Breeders' Cup juvenile effort and making his first start as a 3-year-old in that Fountain of Youth Stakes, he was the one with more recency that I gave a little bit of the edge to. And his performance in there was well done and fine, but he was so much second best to Forte that day and just barely getting by the pace setter in Cyclone Mischief. And I know there's a pretty significant argument that the rail was dead that day at Gulfstream, or at least not the place that you wanted to be. So him just getting by a horse that was on the inside that set those early fractions, who was likely at a disadvantage with where he was on the racetrack, doesn't really flatter his performance. And I think we also saw going into the Arkansas Derby that attempt to dodge Forte for Florida Derby Day. And I think we also kind of saw why. He was very prominent early, more towards the outside of that racetrack. And I think he ran an even fourth that day. But if you're already looking at a horse that hasn't been able to stack up to some of those more serious contenders, such as Forte and now Angel of Empire, I don't know what it's going to take for him to turn the tables on those two, as well as this full field of horses he has yet to face or has yet to be competitive with going forwards into the Kentucky Derby. So for me, we've kind of now slid into more of a pretender category for Rocket Can.
Would you consider for deeper underneath spots, or is this a horse you're more looking to fade?
I think if you want him to be involved in your tickets, the thing that you have to like about him is that he will be more prominent early than some of these other horses that are going to be shorter prices. And I think we're looking at a scenario this year where the pace is a major question. Unlike last year where we saw those very hot fractions set it up for a deep closer like Rich Strike, I don't see any super confirmed frontrunners this year for the Kentucky Derby. And I think a lot of that assumption is going to be that Japan sends their horses early, kind of like they did with Crown Pride last year, as well as perhaps a horse like Confidence Game. Some of these other horses that maybe they aren't confirmed front runners, but they can sit a little closer early. He probably falls into that category, and maybe that's why you want him to be included underneath, hoping the pace doesn't get too hot and that he just sticks around.
In terms of horses you're leaning towards, not going to hold your feet to the fire for the final selection this far out, but who are you thinking is on your short list at this stage?
It's been no secret so far that Confidence Game is a horse that I'm very interested in. And I think I've just secured a better price for myself with this gap between his races, with the Rebel coming into training up until the Kentucky Derby. And I understand why there are some reservations about that kind of lack of race in between those two for him. But I also get that maybe hands were kind of tied with not wanting to rush him into a race after that if he had some trouble acclimating climate-wise back into a warmer temperature or cooler one coming out of that race in the Rebel. And I also understand why you don't want to go into the Lexington and have the short rest in between. And Connections have also said that they're aiming to go into all 3 Triple Crown races if he stays healthy. So perhaps coming in with a fresh horse for that venture is an edge for them. I think that he will be one that's closer up early than some of these other horses. And I think a repeat or an improvement off of that Rebel performance does make him a big contender at what will be a big price as well.
You may have tipped your hand for my next question, which is about this Preakness future wager. It's so important to try to have a horse, well, maybe not so important, but it seems important to me to try to have a horse you think is going to be going to the Preakness, regardless of the necessarily being a Derby winner. Are you leaning towards Confidence Game for the Preakness future wager? Do you have another idea?
It's a strong lean. I'm going to take a look at the field and the options a little bit more, and also what kind of prices we're getting right now. But I would say that that's what comes to mind first when thinking about that idea.
Sara, it was great having you on. We'll have a much longer visit soon, but really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to get to chat with you.
Next up, we have a horse who's not currently in the Kentucky Derby lineup, but of course, that was the case last year at this time as well, and we all know what happened, so we're not skimping on the AEs this time around. And to talk about Major Dude with me here on the show, we bring in the latest member of the content team at InTheMoneyPodcast.com. He's been doing a fantastic job looking into the golden hour bets, specifically from California, Jackson Muniz. Jackson, what's going on?
What's going on, PTF? Happy to be here.
We're very pleased to have you two to talk about Major Dude. We'll start with the key question on this horse. Contender or pretender, do you think, when it comes to this year's Kentucky Derby? Should he get in the field?
I'll go with contender to hit the board. I don't think he can win, but I fully expected not to like him. I'm like, oh, he's going to be a turf horse. Like, he's got no shot. But whatever. I'll take a look at his PP, see what's going on. And I didn't realize he actually ran on the dirt his first 3 starts, actually. So he won at Monmouth on the dirt, and then I think he ran a couple stakes races, like split the field at Toga and then got third or something. But then he's done really well on the turf, and now he's done well on the synthetic too. So I think he's just one of those horses that the surface isn't going to matter to him, especially if the track comes up wet, which is looking increasingly like it might. It shouldn't be an issue for him. The bigger question might be the distance, but that's the case for all these horses. We don't know who can go mile and quarter yet. The biggest thing for me is his figures. I haven't gotten a look at his Time Form US yet, but I did see his buyers, and he's improved his buyer every single start he's up to this point. So he's just going up. And I've kind of adopted this angle from Matt Bernier, who likes that paired up buyer tops. He's a big fan of that. He thinks that it is an indication of big improvement next time. So his last couple starts, he's ran 90, 91. It's basically the same thing, which he's done this before. He ran early in his career. He paired up buyer tops and took I think it was an 8-point leap forward. So if he improves that 91 to a 98, 99, 100, I don't see why he can't be hitting the board. I don't think it's be good enough to win, but he could be right there. Yeah. Especially when you consider the pace scenario. I mean, we talked about this a lot all the way leading up to this Derby. There's not a lot of speed in here. And he's one of those horses who's every single race, he's a length off the lead, 2 lengths off the lead. So if they slow it down, which it's looking, as slowing down as much as the Derby can. Right.
It's all relative.
Right. And he's right there and he can just lope along. I don't see why he can't, make a run in the stretch and see what happens. But we'll see with that.
2 things popped in my mind as you were speaking. One is the sort of classic Todd Pletcher running style, seems like it would be suited to this year's Derby. And everybody's, of course, talking about his other runners. And wouldn't it be just like horse racing to have the one that nobody's talking about potentially be able to plug on and stick on? And then the other thing you were talking about in terms of the gradual figure improvement. And unfortunately, he's not in the Kentucky Derby Advance from Timeform US. I was going to pull up the figures as we talked, but it'll take a little bit more digging. But that idea of that incremental improvement, that's also something that Sean Borman has talked about on our airwaves, where when they're improving and when you can tell that they're improving, sometimes it's very hard to put a ceiling on how far they're going to improve. So I definitely take your point, Jackson, as this horse, if he sneaks in, maybe an interesting one to hit the board, even if he can't win. What's your quick view on the race overall? Do you have this down to a short list or horse you're leaning towards?
The one I'm leaning towards right now is actually Two Phils. I really loved his race 2 back in the Risen Star. I thought he got it was a really good prep. I mean, he was close to that quick pace. He was in between horses the whole time. He split horses, made a move, and he got a little tired late. I think he might have moved a little too early. But him or Practical Move, I think, looks pretty good. And those two are going to be much closer to the pace than, the Fortes, the Two Phils, or even Angel of Empires. So I think one of those two will probably get the jump. But we'll see. I'm also curious to see what the odds are on the Japanese horse, obviously.
Yes, Derma.
He's a big wild card. I have if he's 12-1, I'll probably take him. But if he's 6-1, which I feel like he might be, probably not.
Yeah, there's definitely a wait and see aspect more than most years with this Derby. You mentioned the Jeff Ruby Stakes, clearly a key form line for you. That's the one, Two Phils one with Major Dude well beaten in second. And I remembered I can pull up the figures from that. So yeah, just to give you the run on Major Dude on Timeform. Last time 116, time before 110, 105, 98. 100, and then going back to the dirt races as a 2-year-old, 95, 83, 79. So you see that same kind of improvement you were talking about. Real quick, before we get out of here, Jackson, I want to give you a chance to put your $100 down in the Preakness future bet, which should be open as people are watching this video now already, and will be open through basically up until the time of the Kentucky Derby. Where do you want to put your money?
First Mission, Brad Cox trainee, just won the Lexington. I think he'll be fresh going into the race. All those guys turning back in 2 weeks. He's got a big advantage there. So we'll see what happens.
I love it. Let's tell people where they can follow you on Twitter. It's up there on the screen right now if you're watching along there, at Jax Muniz _. So JAXMUNIZ _. And we can look for your work over at inthemoneypodcast.com. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, BTF. Talk to you soon.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. I want to thank all of the guests. I want to thank JK for doing such a great job in his segments. We'll thank our founding partners, 10 Strike Racing. You know how around here we always love to root for the purple and black, and not just when Looms Boldly is out there on the track in the afternoon. And the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation, looking forward to these events this week. Just a reminder, catch us live in Kentucky next week. Get the full schedule of events inthemoneypodcast.com/live. Check out, around this YouTube channel for more content, wherever you get your podcasts, In the Money Media, all that good stuff. Most of all, though, want to thank all of you, the viewers, the listeners, for making these shows so much fun to do. We appreciate your support immensely. This show's been a production of In the Money Media. Our business manager is Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge champion, Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your Kentucky Derby photos.
Just me.